class and never came home. Elsie, Alice and Bibi were among the 13 people stabbed at the Heart Centre in Southport last July. The local community was devastated by their deaths. Axel Rudakubana was charged with murder and attempted murder. Quickly, misinformation spread online, leading to riots and violence across the country. Later, Rudakubana from West Lancashire was also charged with producing the toxin ricin and terror-related offences. As the trial was set to begin on Monday, he suddenly changed his plea to guilty on all charges. The victims' families wouldn't have to publicly relive the trauma.
There's a sense of relief, but there's also a sense of people want answers. People want to understand why it happened, especially why it happened in Southport, why it happened to our friends, our families, our kids, our community.
On Monday, details were released by police, which hadn't been made public before, in case it prejudiced the trial. At school, Rudakubana had been excluded for carrying a knife and also attacked a pupil with a hockey stick. 3 times he was referred to the government's anti-extremism programme Prevent. A public inquiry will be held into the attacks.
We must make sure the names of those 3 young girls are not associated with the vile perpetrator, but instead with a fundamental change in how Britain protects its citizens and its children.
Today, Rudakubana will be sentenced. It will be the first time details of the case, including his background, will be heard by the public. Sadly, youth was no defence for the 3 girls who lost their lives, forever missed by their families. Alice Porter, Sky News.
Well, details emerging this week have revealed that Axel Rudakuna had been reported to several authorities over his violent interests and actions. We can take a look at what happened in the years leading up to the Southport attack. Rudakubana first became known to a range of local agencies in 2019 because of anxiety, social isolation and challenging behaviour. In October of that year, he took a knife to school and was then expelled from that school, Range High. In December, Rudakubana returned to his former school and attacked another child with a hockey stick, breaking their wrist. Between December 2019 and April 2022, Rudakubana was referred to the government counter-extremism scheme Prevent 3 times. Lancashire Police also had a series of interactions with the teenager, including being called to his house 5 times in the year to May 2022. He was assessed for autism spectrum disorder and given mental health and educational support. In February 2023, Rudakubana stopped engaging with mental health workers, struggled to attend school, and had anxiety, which left him unwilling to leave his house. A week before the attack, the teenager allegedly booked a taxi to take him to his former school, Range High, but it's understood that his father stopped him from leaving. Then, on the 29th of July, Rudakubana was arrested after fatally stabbing Elsie Stankham, Alice De Silva Aguiar and Bibi King at a dance class in Southport. Well, our crime correspondent Martin Brunt joins me now. And Martin, we're not yet 6 months on from those terrible events of the summer, yet here we are at sentencing of the Southport attacker. Let's talk through what's going to happen today, because it's quite unusual circumstances, isn't it, that we find ourselves in with regard to this case and this trial?
Yes, I mean, the one thing to say is that we are not going to get the full details of the police investigation because we're not going to have a trial. But, in the interest of open justice, we will get a short version of that police investigation. So the Crown Prosecution Service lawyer, the prosecutor, will spend probably a couple of hours talking through what the police discovered. That'll be the thrust of what he says. But I think this is perhaps an opportunity as well for the prosecution to answer some of those questions that everybody wants to know. What was the material? that he was looking at online over those years that so filled him full of this obsession with extreme violence. And we know the government is already, in response, talking to the internet providers, trying to take down the stuff that he looked at, the kind of school massacre stuff, the documents on Nazi Germany, genocide material, all of that fueled what the authorities say is an obsession with extreme violence. We may get some indication of what happened on those 3 occasions he was referred to the government's counter-terror system, the PREVENT system. Why, after 3 referrals, it wasn't taken any further. And we understand that one of those referrals was because of concern over his obsession with school massacres. And I think the public will think, if you're referred 3 times, surely it should have gone at least once to the next stage where there would have been more engagement. Now, all of this will be explored after we know what the sentence is, but we might get some indication. And also perhaps the prosecutor in his speech might address the other big issue of why wasn't this designated a terror attack? Why is it still not considered a terror attack? So we'll get that from the prosecutor. Then we'll get victim statements from, we're not quite sure exactly who, but maybe the parents of 1 or more of the 3 girls who died, perhaps from the parents of the other 8 children who were attacked and survived. Some will be read, we think, by those family members. Others will be read by the lawyers. Some will be sent straight to the judge, so we won't hear the details of that. Perhaps that might apply to impact statements from the families of the 3 girls who died. So we'll get all that from the prosecution side. Then it'll be up to Rudakubana's lawyer to offer any kind of mitigation. And it's difficult to know how much there will be. Certainly, he'll argue that there was a guilty plea. So, everybody's been saved a 3 or 4 week trial, but the judge is not going to give him much credit for that. Then we'll get the sentence. And we've already discussed that it cannot be a whole life sentence. I mean, ordinarily, with so many murders and so much premeditation, it would be, I'm sure, a whole life sentence. But because he's under 21, the judge simply can't give him that.
He was just 17 when he carried out the attack. He's 18 now.
Yes, but even so, there are certain restrictions on who can get a whole life sentence. We've only got, 65, I think, prisoners at the moment serving whole life sentences. So the judge will need to decide how many years minimum he must serve before he's eligible for parole. And I mean, goodness, look at the crimes he's admitted. It's going to be a long time. I'd have thought 40 years onwards, something like that, before he'll get the first chance to apply for parole. I think, people will say, will he ever be released? Well, it's possible under the system as it exists. But when he gets to the end of that minimum term he must serve, he'll have to persuade the parole board that he's safe to be released into the public. And that will very much depend on the psychiatric assessments that will be made during his time in prison.
Will we hear anything from Rudakubana's defence team about what he has said to them, his communications, his interaction with police? Because I think that will be of interest to the families, because when I've been speaking to the community, it's the simple things they want to know in the first instance. Why Southport? Why that particular dance class? It's those kind of answers that they want. I mean, we can talk about the broader, the bigger questions in terms of, why isn't he, considered a terrorist threat and all of that. But what they want to know is the detail about why them. Will we get any of that today, do you think?
I don't know that there is anything to say. I mean, we saw from his early court appearances that he refused to say anything.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until Monday this week that we actually heard him speak, at least speak clearly, when he admitted all of those 16 charges. This issue about why wasn't it a terror incident, why is it still not considered a terror incident, is largely based on, the evidence does not suggest any firm ideology. So he wasn't fighting a cause in any political or racial or any other ideological way. But also it's based on his complete refusal to give the authorities any indication about why he did it. Now, maybe he will, once he's settled into his prison sentence, maybe he will open up and begin to give those answers. But I'm not expecting, I don't think anybody's expecting his defence to offer any explanation for why he did it. I mean, perhaps they will, but I don't think there's any indication at the moment that we're going to get that.
Oh, what happened there? Don't know what happened there. Okay. Okay, I'm going to turn the sound down now until they go back to the courtroom. Hang on. I'm not sure what happened there. I think I pressed the wrong button. So here we are. I'm just going to turn the sound down on that for a bit. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in this crazy world we're living in. Now, we're going to stay with Sky News and report on any news that comes through as it comes through. There should be the prosecution is going to go through, we're going to find out more information about the things that Axel Rudakuna was searching online, his internet search history, other things they found in his room, in his home. And, maybe we'll find out more of the reasons why this was never considered a terror attack. And I mean, it obviously is terror, but I think the reason that Prevent, and this is going to change, I think, hopefully from what Keir Starmer's saying, the reason that Prevent didn't take it any further is he did not fit into their current criteria. He's obsessed with death, with knives, with genocide, but he was obsessed with all sorts of different ideologies. If it was violent, he was obsessed with it. So he wasn't specifically Al-Qaeda only he was affiliated to. He was interested in genocide in Nazi Germany. He was interested in the Rwanda genocide. He was interested in school shootings. Really, this boy is obsessed with murder, death, knives, whichever sort of scope it comes from, whichever origin it comes from. And that's why Prevent did not. But even so, he was referred 3 times to them, probably by his own family. I think this boy's family will have gone through absolute hell trying to get help for him, knowing that he wasn't right. That it wasn't right, probably scared for their own lives a lot of the time. His father had already prevented him from going back to his old school to commit more violence, where he'd already broken someone's wrist with a baseball bat. This boy is almost possessed, I think. When you look in his eyes, he just looks so evil. And, I do believe in evil. Some people are just wired wrong. Was he like that? Did he, he seems to have come from a good family, a Christian family. We don't know, obviously, what happens behind closed doors, if there's been anything else going on, but it seems like his brother is not of this persuasion. So I don't think he was, he hadn't converted, to Islam or anything like that. He was just obsessed with violence, and whichever way he could, jump, whatever bandwagon he could have jumped on, he jumped on it, didn't he? And he was obsessed with knives. He bought his knife. He had a machete and 2 knives. He bought his knife that he killed these poor little girls with. He bought it on Amazon. You know, so now that's already led to Keir Starmer and the government making sort of urgent changes to how, I mean, at the end of the day, really, if you order a machete online, now, I see a lot of people in my village with machetes because they use machetes to cut back undergrowth. Farmers use them. You know, they're not only used to actually murder people, of course, are they? But why would someone like Axel need a machete? He's not a farmer. You know, surely like a gun, you know, you've got to apply for a license, haven't you, for a gun? You've got to give a reason why you might want it. Maybe you're a hunter or a farmer, or I don't know, whatever reasons there are that they allow you to have a gun. But it's anyone, I mean, literally here in Spain, you can walk in a shop and buy a machete just there in the Chinese shops, massive knives, etc. No questions asked. I'm presuming that people have to be over 18 to buy them, but I don't even know if that's true. I also know lots of people that have bought their children knives. You know, there's like I had a student who he was obsessed with knives. He didn't seem like a violent person, having said that, you know, but he was only 9 at the time. What, you know, he'll be a teenager now. Wonder what, because puberty, of course, that's when all this aggression and violence comes out. Or if there's any drugs or substance abuse involved, that can bring out sort of latent homicidal tendencies, or drinking or whatever. It can trigger psychotic episodes. So this boy that I used to teach Spanish, who was obsessed with guns, his parents would buy him knives, would buy him a new knife for Christmas. You know, I tell you, in my household, and you know, my son went through problems when he was a teenager, like most probably young boys do. You just have to hope they come out the other side. But there's never been any weapons in my house, let's put it that way. When he was very young, he had a baseball bat, you know, that it was a Barcelona type thing. And then as he got older and he started to sort of, that was straight in the bin. I put it straight in the bin, that baseball bat. Don't want anything around the house because teenagers get involved in fights, don't they, with their friends, or, you know, you'd come back from going out, I say with their friends, but, you know, not all teenagers' friends are friends. You know, they'd go out, they'd be drinking, there'd be a scuffle. So I didn't want my son to have anything that he could take out and do any damage to anybody with, just in case he wanted to, or it might even have been in self-defense. Also, then a friend of mine, a male friend of mine, gave my son a BB gun. That went straight in the bin as well. I don't want my son having any kind of gun, even a BB gun. What for? What do you need a BB gun for? I mean, what? To shoot animals or to shoot people, just like in a joke? Or I just, honestly, you know, this is what you see in America a lot, don't you? A lot of these school shooters, etc. People buy their own children guns for Christmas. And sometimes when their children have already got problems, they buy them a gun for Christmas, teenagers or whatever. Just ridiculous. You know, they've got to take some responsibility, I think, those parents. Well, they are now holding them responsible, aren't they? Now, I'm not saying this is what Axel's parents did. Seems like Axel's parents did as much as they could to, you know, gain the attention of the authorities. They reported him to the Prevent thing. They phoned the police because there were 5 times when they felt under threat from Axel. So I think the parents have tried to do their bit, but you can only report someone that you're worried about. It's difficult to report your child as well. You'd have to be right on the end of your tether before you would report your own child to the police or any authorities. You know, you're not going to just do it because they've said one thing or done one thing. You would have to be at the end of your tether and worrying for your child's safety and other people's safety, because you'd be worrying whether they were going to do something to themselves or do something to other people. So anyway, that you would literally have to be at the end of your tether. So what happens then when you do report it? That won't have been easy to report your own child to the police or to prevent or whatever. That will have been difficult. You take that step, you make that plunge, you're desperate for help, and nothing happens. You know, nothing happens. What more can you do? What more can you do? Hi, Riser. Oh, well, so sorry for Elsie's father and all the family of all the children. Okay, so, well, I don't know if the photo's been altered or not. Maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. But so this boy, and he is a boy at the end of the day, even though he's a man now, he's just turned 18. At 17, he was a boy when he did it. That's why I really do not feel he's going to get a whole life tariff. It's not that I don't want him to get one. I'd love him to get one, but I just don't think he's going to. And also the fact that he pled guilty. Now, that might have been what he was advised by his lawyer in the end, and probably his parents have had some influence on that as well. Plead guilty, you've got a chance of getting out at some point. I think he'll get 30. The figure in my head is 30 years, but maybe he'll get longer. Maybe he'll get 40 years. We have seen some long sentences recently. We saw Irfan Sharif get 44 years, which, it's still not enough in my view. He should have got a whole life tariff, in my opinion. But anyway, there you go. But 44 years still, it's sometimes... In Britain, these life sentences, they're not that long, are they? Especially for a young person, because at the end of the day, he is young. So even if he did his whole 30 years, let's presume he got let out for parole after that. Even if he did that, he would still only be 48, which is still young, isn't it? But I can't see that he's going to ever get out. Personally, I don't think he will ever get out. He may come to a point where he doesn't want to come out. What does he want, this lad? I mean, he didn't want to kill himself, though, did he? I'm probably not supposed to say that, but, quite often, of course, these people, they then delete themselves, don't they, like school shooters do? But maybe it's more complicated when you haven't got a gun, when you're doing it with a knife. How these types of people who are, I mean, at the end of the day, whatever, he's definitely, they've said he's not mentally ill, but he's got to be quite mentally ill, hasn't he, really, to do, there's got to be something wrong with someone to do these kind of things. Maybe he hasn't got a mental illness that they can put in brackets, but it's not something that a normal person does, is it? So, was he just born bad? I honestly do think some people are born evil and they show no remorse. Is he a psychopath? Is he a sociopath? Is he just wired wrong? Just can't feel any empathy? Is it a result of substance abuse? I don't know if that'll come out, whether he has been taking any substances. I don't know. So anyway, hopefully we'll find out a bit more today. The prosecution is supposed to be going to tell us what things he'd been searching on his computer, if these give some sort of insight. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter now, does it? He's pled guilty. He murdered those 3 girls in cold blood and also tried to murder many others. That's all really that matters now, is justice for these girls. But of course, the judge has got to take everything as a whole, take it into consideration. He's got to give a sentence. It's a very important sentence because not only the whole of Britain that will be watching this sentencing today, but all over the world. You know, this case has resonated all over the world. You know, it's not just in Britain. It's a real sort of well, it's just beyond belief, isn't it? You know, it's very rare that you get a case like this. So when they come back on, I'll put it back to Sky News when they come back on talking about the prosecution, etc. Now, you need to get your provisions in because this will probably be quite a long live because we'll have the prosecution presenting, you know, because we've not got a trial, so we're not going to get all the ins and outs of what happened, which is a blessing, I expect, for the parents. Though I'm sure they want to know what happened as well. I mean, you know, we've talked about this before. Everybody reacts in a different way. You know, if it was me, I feel like I would want to know everything, you know, but some people maybe wouldn't. So let's see. Let's just go back to that. Is he talking about it now? All right. So they have this little sort of advert thing, and then they're coming back to the sentencing. Yeah. Now, I've been talking about these bedroom terrorists for ages. There are too many young people sitting in their bedrooms for too long length of time. On the internet, you can see anything on the internet. How do you censor the internet? And then once they get to 18 even, which is still young really, then you can't censor it, can you? Because they're considered a grown-up then, they're considered an adult. And I know from experience, once people become 18, you as a parent, you can't do anything. You know, so if you have got children, you know, young children, young adults who have got mental health issues, or you're having problems with, or you can see that they've got problems, you need to get it sorted before they're 18, because once they're 18, you can't do anything because they are then, you know, autonomous in their own. And if they don't want to take their tablets, if they don't want to go and see their psychologist, if they don't want to do this, there's nothing you can do. Nothing you can do, even as a parent, because they won't take any notice of what you say, because your child then is an adult. So you want, as soon as you see any of these type of, it's hard to spot them, I think, in the beginning, because you think, well, you know, teenagers do go through difficult times, don't they? So it's difficult to spot what is just a normal teenager being a bit of a shit, really, because teenagers are little shites, basically. You know, they're very selfish, they say hurtful things, they don't see consequences of their actions. These are typical things that teenagers do, or a lot of them. But what's the difference between a teenager just doing teenager things and then crossing that line into something worse? And it's hard to spot in the beginning. Sometimes you don't spot it until it's all full blown, you know. So I would just say that if you do think your child's got any problems, your young adult child, young teenager, 13, 14, puberty is a nightmare, isn't it? Get them to a psychologist. Don't think, oh no, they'll be okay. You don't know that they'll be okay. You're better off thinking, no, they won't be okay. Get them to a psychologist. Get them some sort of help before they get to 18. And that's a very quick period as well. Between 13 and 18, it's 5 years. It flies past because there's so much going on. You know, it's really, it feels like lurch from one disaster to another. Okay, let's have a look at this now. So, yeah, get them to a doctor.
Teenager Axel Rudakuna will be sentenced for the murder of 3 young girls in Southport last summer. Earlier this week, 18-year-old Rudakubana pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder, 10 counts of attempted murder, 2 terrorism charges, and knife possession. 7-year-old Elsie Dot Stanken, 9-year-old Alice De Silva Aguiar, and 6-year-old BB King were killed at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class in Southport in July. Floral tributes were left on the road near where the attack happened in the following days. Members of the community tended to them over the coming weeks. Today, the families, friends and community whose lives were changed forever wait to hear the fate of the man responsible. Well, let's just remind you how the attack unfolded in July. On the 29th of that month last year, Axel Rudakuna fatally stabbed Elsie, Alice and Bibi, who were all attending that dance class with other children in Southport. The following day, a vigil was held in memory of the victims. Over the coming days, thousands of flowers were left on the street near where the attack happened. On the 31st of July, a number of protests took place across the country amid false rumours that the girl's killer was a migrant. More than 100 arrests were made. A month into his premiership, Sir Keir Starmer holds an emergency Cobra meeting in an effort to curb the disorder. By the 14th of August, more than 1,000 arrests have been made in relation to those riots. On the 30th of October, Axel Rudakubana appeared in court to face 2 new terror charges: production of biological toxin and possessing information of a kind likely to be useful to a person committing or preparing an act of terrorism. At the start of this week, Rudakubana pleaded guilty to all 16 counts he was charged with: 3 counts of murder, 10 of attempted murder, those 2 terror offences, and 1 charge of possession of a knife. Well, of course, Southport has been torn apart by the tragic events of last summer. I spoke to Mark Foreman, who has been instrumental in raising funds for the families of the victims. I started by asking if the people of Southport can ever truly recover.
I think it will recover, and unlike with the grieving process, that if a relative or somebody close to you dies, it does take time. And I guess the trauma thing of ups and downs, and things will, little traumas or little T's or big T's, to say what affects you more going forth. And people will get on, and people will start coming back to Southport. And I mean, if you walk down the high street and if you walk to our parks and the schools and everything, people are getting on, and people are getting on with their own lives. But it's been tainted. It's been tainted from the actions of one individual and obviously the rioters the next night. And we are getting on, and we are grieving.
This week, Southport was steeling itself for a trial, a long trial, having to relive the trauma of the events of the summer. That all changed on Monday when a guilty plea was entered. What was the reaction to that? Because you were getting ready for the long haul, steeling yourself mentally for that. And now it will all be finished by the end of this week. What was the reaction like to that? Was there a sense of relief?
There's a sense of relief, but there's also a sense of people want answers. People want to understand why it happened, especially why it happened in Southport, why it happened to our friends, our families, our kids, our community. Because it makes no sense in my world, in my life, because these sort of things don't happen around the corner from where we live. I've lived in London before, and even then you kind of expect, higher crime rates and stuff, but even nothing like this. So there's a general feeling of, I guess, frustration, and there will be anger, and depending on what the trial says tomorrow for the sentencing, I don't know what will happen, but I'm hoping that it's going to be closure. I'm hoping that it's going to be, people can start getting on with their lives, people can start healing more and grieving more, and just forget it happened. I know it's not going to be possible to forget.
And you can see my conversation with Mark Foreman tonight on our programme coming up at 8 o'clock. The UK Tonight will be live in Southport. Well, joining me now here in Liverpool, outside court, editor of the Southport Lead, Jamie Lopez. And Jamie, the one thing I've come to learn about Southport over the last 6 months is everybody knows everyone. You're such a tight-knit community. You know Mark, we were just talking about that during our clip of his interview there. Talk to me about what today means for Southport.
So I think the first thing to say, really, I've compared to how this week was expected, there's no overriding sense of relief. The trial was a date that I think an awful lot of people have been completely dreading. The idea that it needed to go ahead because this man was refusing to speak was incomprehensible. And there's for so many people, the wounds are still raw, and to know that the victims, the families who've lost children, the people who responded that day just because they happened to live nearby, even the emergency service, the fact they would all have to come here and relive what happened day by day for week after week, I think was causing an additional level of trauma. So the fact that that's been avoided is as positive as anything can come at this stage. As for today, it would be wrong to say there's any kind of closure that's possible, but the idea that people can stop seeing that man's face all over, every time they look at the phones or the TVs, this kind of stuff needs to be reported, it needs to be understood. But I think in Southport there's a sense, there's a desire to focus on the legacy and honouring those poor children and remembering the good rather than letting that man dominate and define Southport, because that isn't how it should be seen, that isn't how it wants to be seen.
Yeah. There will be information that comes out today from the prosecution. We will hear victim impact statements from the families. I know Alice's parents have arrived here in court today. That's important for them to have their moment in court, to have their voices heard, because for the last 6 months, understandably, the families haven't spoken. The community has wrapped their arms around them and kept them safe. But for them today to be in that court, to have a sentencing, to have the man that killed their little girl sent to prison for a long time, that's very important in taking that next step.
Absolutely. I mean, and they are the voices that deserve to be heard. They are the people whose opinion matters.
Yeah.
They have gone through something that, to describe it as your worst nightmare doesn't even come close to it. They are the people who deserve to have the attention. They've kept a very dignified silence for these past 6 months, and it is important now that they get that chance, and they get a chance to say it on a public record, and that the person responsible is forced to hear it and forced to understand. Whether he's capable of that is a different question, but this is their chance, and they are the ones who deserve to have the focus and the attention and the support.
And I was talking about it in my conversation with Mark Foreman about what the community have been doing to support not just the families directly affected, but people who lived on Hart Street, people who saw the aftermath of that, who ran towards danger to help those girls and the teachers caught up in this. The wider community, everybody knows everyone. So young girls and boys who could have been in that dance class, but it was really popular, it was full, they couldn't get in. The ripple effect of what happened is so powerful. How have you been supporting the community as a whole?
Yeah, because I think back to that to July 29th, and you start with the sounds, and the rumours kind of start to unfold, and then it turns to, oh my God, were your children there? Do you know somebody who was there? And once the horrific details came out, I think the response was extraordinary. You look, the vigil that took place the day after, there's more than 1,000 people there for something that started with a Facebook post. Yeah. And it wasn't in any way officially organised at first. It was just people wanted to find a way to honour the children, to honour the victims, to help their families, but also to come together and support each other, because no one could really get their head around something so horrific happening on their doorsteps. And then a day later, you get those awful riots. And the following morning, people immediately, their first response is to get out and clean up, help repair the mosque, help fix walls.
Yeah, can we talk about that? Because, the shining light in Southport during that really dark time, I noticed it was palpable. It was the community coming together. But because of what happened, there was so much division as well. Those riots sparked by what happened because of misinformation, totally unrelated to the tragedy, the personal tragedy that Southport was feeling. What's the lasting effect of that? Because I spoke to so many angry residents. There was one woman I spoke to who said, I'm so angry, I can't talk to you on camera, but this isn't in our name. This is not what it was about. Do not associate whatever you want to get angry about with what's happened to those 3 little girls and us, this community.
Yeah, I think there's a great desire for Southport not to be defined by the attack. The residents here, we want to honour the girls, honour the victims, but not to be defined by the actions of one evil man. It's that, that response that happened in the days afterwards, that's continued for months on. There's still fundraising events going on. There's still memorial events. You can, if you drive around Southport now, you'll still see the pink bows which are up there to remember the three girls.
The community, because it doesn't end with the sentencing today. There is a long-lasting impact that there's no time frame on that.
No, absolutely. I mean, as I say, the kind of the wounds are still very raw. We're 6 months on, which is nothing really. There's going to be times when when the anniversary comes around and it's all going to be relived again. But all of those efforts, all those the fundraising efforts, the charity events, the community events of bringing people together, they will continue. And I think Southport has been determined to show its best colours in the light of just something that was unimaginable.
The spotlight will come to Southport once again if and when a public inquiry is held. How does the community feel about that? Because I know there was a real sense of confusion at the start of this week when it was understood that the trial wouldn't last 4 to 6 weeks. It would finish today, in fact. There was no sitting during the week. It's literally all about today. And so they wanted questions, answers they may never get, but they wanted those questions to be asked. Is a public inquiry important to the community at Southport?
I think what needs to happen is there needs to be learning from this.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's nothing that can be done to bring those girls back, but I think, as the Prime Minister said on Tuesday, what can happen is changes can be made to make sure that no other families have to live through this, because it's so senseless. And you look at the opportunities that were missed to have made intervention, and people do want answers over that, because this feels, as more details have emerged or become public, it does feel this could have been avoided, and that's something that's going to be even more hard for the families to accept.
And you say nobody wants Southport to be defined by what happened, but it really has cast a shadow over the town over the last 6 months. And I know that tourism businesses have been affected because people haven't wanted to come to Southport. And I suppose part of that healing and moving on for the community is saying, we want life to return to some sort of normality. Please come to Southport. And I think that's really important in the healing process and moving on.
Yeah, and I think the message from the sort of businesses throughout has always been, we are still open. I mean, what happened on July 29th is not a wider reflection of the town or the activity here. And I think, as you say, it needs to be able to heal and to be able to recover and to move forward. Southport will always be an open and welcoming, friendly place for any visitors.
Yeah. Jamie, really good to talk to you. Jamie Lopez there, editor of the Southport Lead. Thank you for your time today. Thank you. Well, we will be here throughout the day at Liverpool Crown Court for the sentencing of the Southport attacker. You can follow it. We have a live blog up on the Sky News website, and you can, of course, follow it with us here on television as well. But for now, I'll hand back to the studio. We'll be back at 11 o'clock.
SJ, thanks so much. Here we're going to return to California. And earlier in the programme, we told you about those latest evacuation orders triggered by yet another new fire near Los Angeles, LA, which will host the Olympics.
Okay, so when they go back to the normal news, we'll come off it and look at some other things. So the thing is with this boy, apparently, I think what is also worrying is apparently he spoke freely about these obsessions he had with knives, with violence, with genocide, with the Nazis, with terrorist organisations, with the IRA. This is why they failed to identify him as a terrorist, because he did not identify with one group in particular. Anyone who was committing genocide or murdering, he was looking into, hopefully we're going to find that out this morning for certain, he was looking into his online activity was not restricted to Islamist terrorism. So this is why they were saying they could not connect him to one particular terrorist group. He was looking, as I say, at Nazi Germany, atrocities there, genocide in Rwanda, the IRA bombings. If there was a bombing, he was looking into it, or if there was terrorism, violence, he was looking into all of it. So really, he was obsessed with violence in general and knife crime particularly. So that's, I think, what made, but, then that just makes me think, well, why didn't they section him? His own parents rang the police about him 5 times, his own parents. Then he was referred to Prevent 3 times. He'd already broken a pupil's wrist. He'd gone into this, viciously attacked another pupil years before. He had this history. You just think, how many red flags do you need? This boy needed sectioning. They say they're not going to connect it with mental health, but obviously he's not, he's not a full shilling. Sorry, pardon the expression, but is he? No one who goes and breaks another young person's wrist. Maybe the other person did bully them. Maybe he was bullied at school. Most children are bullied at school one way or the other, but they don't go and do these extremes. So he was like he was like a bomb waiting to go off, wasn't he, himself? He was like a bomb, just all these things. And all the authorities probably passed it around, or the school passed it to the social services pass it to Prevent. I don't know who reported him to Prevent, whether that was his own parents or maybe it was the police, because the parents had phoned the police. Maybe we'll get to find out the chain of events. But it just seems like an absolute disaster. He literally was a bomb waiting to go off. He was going to go off somewhere. And unfortunately, it was these 3 little angels that paid the ultimate price for not only for his evilness, because I do think he's evil. I think he's possessed. I mean, I do believe in possession. He looks like he's possessed, doesn't he? So these little girls paid the price for his evil, but also his unchecked evil. He was not dealt with properly. I mean, I don't know what the answer is, but he should have. I just feel like, I don't know, some people need to be locked up for other people's protection. This boy, he couldn't have given any more red flags if he tried. He was open about it. He wasn't trying to hide it. Sometimes these things do come out of the blue. You'll get someone and people will say, oh, he seemed like such a nice person, blah, blah, blah. Oh, no, there was no signs. But with this boy, there were signs. He wasn't a nice person. His neighbours said he just glared at them. Maybe when he was a little boy, he was nice, but really from being sort of early teens, he hadn't been a nice person. He wasn't nice to anybody. He wasn't nice to his family. So you couldn't say that it came out the blue. Everybody knew he was a twat before he was a real twat. Anyway, so I just want to show you this. So this is what an expert is saying, what they think will happen, what sentence this boy will get. They don't think he'll get, I don't think he'll get a whole life tariff. But as someone said in the chat, it will feel like a whole life tariff because he'll never get out. I don't think he'll ever be given parole.
The judge said it would be the equivalent of a life sentence because he was under 18. He was 9 days short of his 18th birthday at the time of these dreadful crimes. He will be sentenced to what's called detention during His Majesty's pleasure. And that just means indefinite detention. The judge, of course, has to set a minimum term, but because he is, normally you might well have had a whole life sentence, but you can't make a whole life order in the case of a person who was under 18 at the time the offence was committed. So what he will get is a minimum term and no doubt very long.
Okay, but to all intents and purposes, amounts to the same thing?
It amounts to the same thing, exactly so. I mean, the judge has to set a starting point. And if he'd been 18 for 2 murders or more, the starting point would be 30 years. Because he's 17 at the time, it'll be 27 years. But you can add to that, because of what are called aggravating factors, and there may be a reduction for what are called factors that are mitigating to reduce it. And then you come up with a total. And of course, it doesn't mean that's the sentence you'll serve. That's the minimum you'll serve before the parole board would consider whether you're safe to be released.
Okay, let's just watch that again, because I did think that was very interesting. because this guy is an expert on sentencing. So this is what he thinks. Let's just watch one more time.
And the judge said it would be the equivalent of a life sentence because he was under 18. He was 9 days short of his 18th birthday at the time of these dreadful crimes. He will be sentenced to what's called detention during His Majesty's pleasure. And that just means indefinite detention. The judge, of course, has to set a minimum term, but because he is, normally you might well have had a whole life sentence, but you can't make a whole life order in the case of a person who was under 18 at the time the offence was committed. So what he will get is a minimum term, and no doubt very long.
Okay, but to all intents and purposes, amounts to the same thing?
It amounts to the same thing, exactly so. I mean, the judge has to set a starting point, and if he'd been 18 for 2 murders or more, the starting point would be 30 years. Because he's 17 at the time, it'll be 27 years. But you can add to that, because of what are called aggravating factors, and there may be a reduction for what are called factors that are mitigating to reduce it. And then you come up with a total. And of course, it doesn't mean that's the sentence you'll serve. That's the minimum you'll serve before the parole board would consider whether you're safe to be released.
Yeah, it's interesting that actually, because I think it's true that it almost doesn't matter what sentence he gets, because that's the minimum term, isn't it? So even if he got a minimum term of 20 years, which I think it will be more than that, definitely, but it doesn't mean to say he's going to be out after 20 years. That's his minimum. Then he's got to apply for parole. And he's unlikely, isn't he, ever to get parole? I'm trying to think of anybody similar to him. Can anybody think of any similar cases in the UK? I mean, there's obviously Jamie Bulger's killers. Well, they were even younger, weren't they? They were under 10, weren't they? So they're free, and well, I say they're free. One of them is back in prison now because it proved to be for Jamie Bulger's killers. One of them has been in and out of prison like a yo-yo, because every time they let him out, he goes and commits more crimes with child loving, doesn't he? Not John Venables, the other guy, I can't remember his name. He's in prison at the moment, I think. But it just goes to show he hasn't been rehabilitated, really, has he? Maybe he hasn't murdered another child, but he's still obsessed with children in an sex way. Whereas the other boy, John Venables, as far as we know, and there are rumours, but again, they're just rumours, that he's not in the UK anymore, that he's actually in Australia, but I don't know if that's true or not. There's also rumours that he's now in a gay relationship. And there's certainly, as far as we know, John Venables has not committed any other crimes. As far as we know, anyway, would we even get, I think we would get to know if he was put back into prison like we have with the other guy, but then he'll just be released with a new identity again, because these bloody horrible, see, to me, those boys, I'm sorry, I know they were only boys, but what they did to Jamie Bulger, they should never have been released from prison. In my opinion, don't care how young they were, because that is not what somebody does. Even children who, I know they can do, children do bad things, shoplifting, take drugs, I don't know, maybe even beat somebody up or, do things, but not what they did to that little boy. They went out looking for a little boy. That day, they were looking for a boy, or a boy or a girl, a child to kidnap. They were looking to do some damage. They're bad inside. Some people are bad inside. Now, having said that, maybe I've been proved wrong by the fact, has John Venables gone on to become a productive member of society? Maybe he has. And maybe I'm wrong with him, but I'm not wrong with the other one, that's for sure. So I'm not sure it'd be a long day, Darren, if you because we've got to hear from the prosecution, yeah, and then the judges, you know, there'll probably be a look. I don't think the actual final sentencing will happen till this afternoon. What I'm hoping will happen this morning is that we'll get to hear what the prosecution has got to say. So we'll get more information about, you know, Axel and the build up to these crimes. Then we'll probably get the judge talking. Then the judge will probably go off for lunch to consider the sentence. That's when I'll probably stop the live. But, you know, I don't know, because at the end of the day, the judges, they're not thinking about us all waiting for the sentence. They just do things in their own time. But I think he'll probably, when he's heard from the prosecution and the victim impact statements, etc., the judge will then probably ask for a recess for lunch. Then he will. So I think the actual sentencing might not happen for, you know, the final sentence, but there'll be information hopefully leading up to that. Good night, Kelly. Probably by the time you wake up, we'll still be here waiting for the sentence. Anyway, good night. Is it John Venables who's in prison? What's the... Oh, Robert somebody. What's the other guy called? John Venables is the one in prison. So what's the other one called? Why can't I feel like it's Robert something, but I can't remember his name. Let's have a look. So it's John Venables who's ended up back in prison. Sorry, I can't find the name of the other one. Thompson. Is it Robert Thompson? Yeah, Robert Thompson. He's the one that seems to have become as far as we know, become a productive member of society, hasn't gone back to prison. He's supposedly in a gay relationship and supposedly not living in the UK. But again, all these are rumours because we can't know, because these things are secret, aren't they? But yeah, John Venables, he's the one who's been back and forward like on an elastic to prison. You know, they just want to lock him up and throw away the key, because he almost can't help it. You know, I do believe they can't help it. They're wired wrong. You know, there's something, but they can't rehabilitate. He's never going to rehabilitate. He's been given every chance in the world to rehabilitate. Forget him. Lock him up, throw away the key, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, let's go back to Sky News Live, because it might go. Something will come out.
This is Sky News Live from Liverpool today, where the Southport killer is due to be sentenced. Axel Rudakubana will find out the length of his prison sentence later, after pleading guilty to the murder of 3 girls at a dance class in Southport. The families of his young victims await the judge's decision, following the tragedy that shocked the nation last summer. We'll have full coverage from here throughout the day for you, and we will bring you the moment of sentencing from inside court live. Well, good morning to you from Liverpool Crown Court, where within the coming hours, the man who killed 3 young girls at a dance class in Southport last year will be sentenced. In the last few minutes, Axel Rudakuna has arrived here at Liverpool Crown Court in a prison van. On Monday, he pleaded guilty to the murders of 6-year-old BB King, 7-year-old Elsie Dot Stankham, and 9-year-old Alice Da Silva Aguirre, as well as the attempted murder of 10 others. Well, today, the families, friends and community whose lives were changed forever that day wait to hear the fate of the man responsible. We'll be bringing you full coverage of the sentencing throughout the morning on Sky News, and we'll have the latest from inside court as events get underway a little later. But we first start with this report from Sky's Alice Porter.
It's 6 months since these 3 girls went to a dance class and never came home. Elsie, Alice and Bibi were among the 13 people stabbed at the Heart Centre in Southport last July. The local community was devastated by their deaths. Axel Rudakubana was charged with murder and attempted murder. Quickly, misinformation spread online, leading to riots and violence across the country.
Isn't it? This is just repeating what we listened to earlier. I don't know what to do because I'm thinking I may have to go off and come back. But you know, the minute I go off, something's going to happen. I might just leave it running, but I've got a couple of things I've just got to do only in the house. Like I've got to swap the dogs over.
People want answers.
Got to make some lunch, get the lunch ready.
What happened in Southport? What happened to our friends, our families, our kids?
So I think what I'm going to do.
On Monday, details were released by police, which hadn't been made public before, in case it prejudiced the trial.
I'm going to leave this running for you to look at while I just go off. I've got some things I've got to do around the house. But I'll be, see, when I look at this guy, he looks like he's not good there, is he? When he was young, when he was 13, you can see in his face. But anyway.
Are not associated with the vile perpetrator, but instead with a fundamental change in how Britain protects its citizens and its children.
Today, Rudakubana will be sentenced. It will be the first time details of the case, including his background, will be heard by the public. Sadly, youth was no defence for the 3 girls who lost their lives, forever missed by their families. Alice Porter, Sky News.
Let's bring in our crime correspondent, Martin Brunt, who's here with me outside Liverpool Crown Court. Martin, the hearing due to begin shortly. We understand people are still being guided in. It's a really busy, small courtroom. So we do believe that proceedings will get underway shortly. It was due to start at 11 o'clock. But of course, such is the level of interest. We did expect a long trial. It's going to be condensed into one day today and be finished by, this afternoon.
And it's going to be pretty harrowing. We know that Alice's parents have arrived at court. We don't know how many other parents will be here. I mean, we've heard in the last few days this sense that because Rudakubana has pleaded guilty, people will have, observers, the victims will have been spared a lot of the detail of the injuries that were inflicted by Rudakubana. Nonetheless, there will be some of that detail given today. We as broadcasters have agreed that we will not report that some of the most awful details, but nonetheless, we will report a lot of what the prosecutor has to say. So we're not going to get the fine detail of the whole police investigation that we would have got in a 3 or 4 week trial and the cross-examination of that by defence lawyers. But we will get probably about 2 hours of an explanation from the prosecutor of what happened on that day and something, I think, of the interaction between the various agencies with Rudakubana in the years leading up to the events of last July.
It's worth pointing out that some of the detail heard in court that we won't be making public is out of sensitivity to the families.
Yes, I mean, that's basically it. I mean, there's no need really, and I think most people accept that, for us as broadcasters and our newspaper colleagues to dwell on the acute details of the injuries that were inflicted on such young victims.
Can we talk about sentencing? Because, of course, Rudakubana was 17 when he carried out the attack. He is 18 now, but we are told that because of his age, he will not be given a whole life order. The expectation is it will be a life sentence. What are the implications of that? How will that work?
Well, the judge can't, under the sentencing guidelines, he can't give him a whole life sentence because, broadly, because he's under 21. There are certain qualifications for people to be given whole life sentences, which is why it doesn't happen very often. I mean, I think we've got something like 65 prisoners in jail at the moment who are subjected to whole life sentences. Because he's admitted murder, he's convicted essentially of murder, he will automatically get a life sentence. But it'll be up to the judge to determine the minimum number of years that he'll have to serve before he's eligible for parole. And it's going to be a long time. I mean, 3 murders, 10 attempted murders, and the other crimes that he's admitted to. I mean, he's going to get a sentence, I'd have thought, in the 30, 40 years. And he'll have to do that sentence before he can apply for parole. And there's no guarantee that if he does ever apply for parole, that he'll be freed. The parole board at that stage, many, many years on, will have to decide whether he's, you know, at such a low risk that he can be released into back into the public. And that will be determined by various psychiatric assessments that will be done throughout his prison sentence. But even if he was to be released at some stage, because he's a life prisoner, he'll be subject to the licensing conditions for the rest of his life, which would mean that even if he was released, he could at any stage be sent back to prison, not because he's committed another offence, but because something might have changed in the assessment of the risk he posed. So, you know, it really is going to be a life sentence. It's possible that he'll never be released.
Rudakubana arrived in court not too long ago, actually, the police van coming in to court, and in the last hearing he appeared via video link. Him being in court today, what does that mean? Was because we have seen it in some cases, those defendants not going to court. Was that ever in doubt today, or was he always going to appear?
Well, prisoners do have the right not to appear. Judges take a very stern view of it, and I know in 1 or 2 other high-profile cases where it's happened in the last couple of years, you know, there was a move to make it mandatory for prisoners to appear, certainly for their sentencing. But, you know, how do you police that? You know, if somebody refuses to come out of their prison cell, do you manhandle them? You know, it's a very difficult thing to resolve. But he is here. I guess what it means for his victims who are in court, or the parents of victims, the families of victims, they will perhaps for the first time be sitting across the courtroom from the man who killed their daughters or tried to kill their daughters. And that is going to be, you know, a very, very difficult time. But the people who are there, those victims who are there, know that he, or anticipate that he is going to be there. So I guess they are steeling themselves for that moment. And perhaps some of them want to see him, to look at him and try and get some kind of understanding about what he did and why he did it.
Really difficult and intense day for those families inside court today. Martin, thank you. That hearing due to get underway shortly. It was due to start at 11 o'clock, but of course, as you can understand, so many people wanting to be in that courtroom for such an important day for Southport. Proceedings have been delayed ever so slightly. Well, Southport as a town torn apart by those tragic events of last summer. I've been speaking to Mark Foreman, who has been instrumental in pulling the community together, raising funds for the families of the victims. I spoke to him yesterday, and I started by asking if people there can ever truly recover.
I think it will recover, and unlike with the grieving process, that if a relative or somebody close to you dies, it does take time. And I guess the trauma thing of ups and downs, and things will, little traumas or little T's or big T's, to say what affects you more going forth. And people will get on, and people will start coming back to Southport. And I mean, if you walk down the high street and if you walk to our parks and the schools and everything, people are getting on. People are getting on in their lives, but it's been tainted. It's been tainted from the actions of one individual, and obviously the rioters the next night. And we are getting on, and we are grieving.
This week, Southport was steeling itself for a trial, a long trial, having to relive the trauma of the events of the summer. That all changed on Monday when a guilty plea was entered. What was the reaction to that? Because you were getting ready for the long haul, steeling yourself mentally for that. And now it will all be finished by the end of this week. What was the reaction like to that? Was there a sense of relief?
There's a sense of relief, but there's also a sense of people want answers. People want to understand why it happened, especially why it happened in Southport, why it happened to our friends, our families, our kids, our community. Because it makes no sense in my world, in my life, because these sort of things don't happen around the corner from where we live. I've lived in London before, and even then you kind of expect, higher crime rates and stuff, but even nothing like this. So there's a general feeling of, I guess, frustration, and there will be anger, and depending on what the trial says tomorrow for the sentencing, I don't know what will happen, but I'm hoping that it's going to be closure. I'm hoping that it's going to be, people can start getting on with their lives, people can start healing more and grieving more and just forget it happened. I know it's not going to be possible to forget.
And you can watch the full interview with Mark Foreman, one of the community leaders in Southport, on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock. Now, Axel Rudakubana had been reported to several authorities over his violent interests and actions. We can take a look now at what happened in the years leading up to the attack. Rudakubana first became known to a range of local agencies in 2019 because of anxiety, social isolation, and challenging behaviour. In October of that year, he took a knife to school and was then expelled from Range High. In December, Rudakubana returned to his former school and he attacked another child with a hockey stick, breaking their wrist. Between December 2019 and April 2022, Rudakubana was referred to the government counter-extremism scheme, PREVENT, 3 times. Lancashire Police also had a series of interactions with the teenager, including being called to his house 5 times in the year to May 2022. He was assessed for autism spectrum disorder and given mental health and educational support. In February 2023, Rudakubana stopped engaging with mental health workers. He was struggling to attend school and had anxiety, which left him unwilling to leave the house. A week before the Southport attack, the teenager allegedly booked a taxi to take him to his former school, Range High. But it's understood his father stopped him from leaving. Then, on the 29th of July, Rudakubana was arrested after fatally stabbing Elsie, Alice and Beebe at a dance class in Southport. Well, Martin Brunt is here with me while we wait for proceedings to get underway in the court behind us. And Martin, let's just go through that timeline of events there. When it's all together in a summary, it looks pretty damning as to why he wasn't picked up by some agency, some authority as a threat. And that is a big question hanging over what's happening here today.
Well, I think the thing is, he was picked up by all those agencies. This isn't a teenager who fell through the net. He was caught in the net many, many times. But it wasn't taken any further. And you talked about the 3 referrals to the government's counter-terror programme, PREVENT. Now, 3 times he was referred, but it didn't go any further. When you get referred, you're assessed. And then if the assessment is such that you do pose a risk.
You have to meet criteria.
Yeah. And many, many thousands of people are referred, but don't go any further. That's one of the criticisms about the system, that it sweeps up too many people because the definition of extremism is too wide, and that may change with the review that's going on at the moment. But if you are referred and you're deemed to be a threat, you should be moved on to the next stage, which is called channel, which is where there's a much more of an engagement. But it's always voluntary. So if you as the referee refuse to engage, I'm not quite sure how much can be done and whether that's what happened in each case. And we've seen in his various court appearances how uncommunicative Rudakubana is. that might be the explanation for why it wasn't taken any
There
further.
was a point in the information that came out on Monday, there was a point where he was cooperating with local agencies and authorities when he was flagged as a risk to help them, whether it's mental support, educational support. So there was a point at which he engaged. And then it seems to be COVID that stopped all of that. That seems to be the trail, doesn't it, where everything sort of fell off a cliff for him.
Well, I think we await a fuller explanation, don't we? I mean, that's why there's a public inquiry.
Yeah.
That's why the Lancashire child safeguarding system has its own internal independent investigation. I mean, there are so many reviews going on that those are the kind of answers that it's hoped those various reviews, inquiries will give us at some stage. Whether we'll get any answers to those questions this morning from the prosecutor, it perhaps is a chance for the prosecutor not just to explain the police investigation and what was discovered, but perhaps to give a bit more detail about those various engagements and why they didn't work, and why enough wasn't done. I mean, could enough have been done? I mean, we don't know enough about what those engagements involved, but perhaps he was counselled, perhaps there came an end to it, and who could foresee perhaps that it would result in something as awful and violent as it was on 29th of July last year. But you would have thought, and I can understand why there's so much concern publicly, that with all those engagements, particularly the referrals to the counter-terror government programme, that he was still free to go and commit those dreadful crimes.
We are hearing from our colleagues inside court, the hearing delayed slightly as the court fills up, people filing into the courtroom. Such is the level of interest in this case. It shocked a nation. It got global attention, Martin, but for those inside court, it is the families of the victims, the families of those injured, the wider community. People want to be in there for this moment because it's so important.
Yes, I mean, I suppose in a broad sense, it's all about justice being seen to be done. As we said earlier, we're not going to get a full trial. We're not going to get 3 or 4 weeks of fine detail of what happened and what he did and the engagement with those various agencies. But, people do want to have as much of an understanding about what happened and why as they can. And this really is the opportunity. We don't know quite how much detail the Crown Prosecution Service prosecutor will go into, and we're certainly not going to get all that fine detail I mentioned earlier, but we'll probably get 2 hours of an insight into the police investigation and what they learned about what he did. I mean, the thing that we won't get is why he did it, because he hasn't engaged, he hasn't offered any explanation. And I think at the end of today, it will still come down to this was a teenager with a bizarre fascination with extreme violence.
Okay, Martin, thank you very much. Martin Brunt, our crime correspondent. Stay with us here on Sky News. Coming up, we'll be hearing from the editor of the Southport Lead on how the Southport Attack has impacted the local community.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a football.
Hey, okay, so they keep we're only really here to watch that, to watch the verdict, what the prosecution has to say, to get as much information as we can, watch the verdict. So when Sky goes on to these other things, I'm going to be coming off it. I don't know if you heard all that kerfuffle then. I swapped the dogs over. Then Amazon turned up with an Amazon delivery. I asked him to bring it up the top of the steps. He left it down at the bottom of the steps, so I had to go out. Oh, do you know what? Amazon, they don't listen to you sometimes, do they? Sometimes I get really nice Amazon delivery drivers, and other times, no. Anyway, today, well, he just couldn't be asked. bringing it up the steps. There's only a few steps. It's just that for me to go down the steps and get it, I've got to think about what I'm going to do with the German Shepherd. Oh dear. Anyway, I've got my things now. Oh, Lorna, sorry, Yvonne, you've got a sad heart today. You mean for these girls? Or have you got other things going on? I mean, it is heartbreaking, isn't it? And do you know what? I feel for the girls. I feel for the families of the girls. But do you know, I also feel for Axel Rudakubana's family, because I do think they tried really hard from when he was 13 years old. So they've had 4 years of hell with this boy, because it seems like his problems seem to start 12, 13, as they often do. I've seen it happen. You know, I know exactly how that feels. I literally do. When, you know, things are going on, and I know lots of people who it's happened to as well. You know, those teenagers, honest to God, I swear, if you knew what it was going to be like to go through the teenage years with your children, you probably never have children. I think, you know, the trouble is you forget what you were like as well. And I think when we were teenagers, when I was a teenager, I always think, oh, I wasn't a bad teenager. But then when I think about it more, and I didn't do anything terrible. Don't get me wrong. I did nothing like what he's done. But, oh, is this breaking news? Hang on.
Relive what happened day by day for week after week. I think was causing an additional level of trauma. So the fact that that's been avoided is as positive as anything can come at this stage. As for today, it would be wrong to say there's any kind of closure that's possible, but the idea that people can stop seeing that man's face all over, you know, every time they look at the phones or the TVs, you know, this kind of stuff needs to be reported, it needs to be understood. But I think in Southport there's a sense, there's a desire to focus on, you know, the legacy and honouring, you know, those poor children and remembering the good rather than letting that man dominate and define Southport, because that isn't how it should be seen, that isn't how it wants to be seen.
Yeah. There will be information that comes out today from the prosecution. We will hear victim impact statements from the families. I know Alice's parents have arrived here in court today. That's important for them to have their moment in court, to have their voices heard, because for the last 6 months, understandably, the families haven't spoken. The community has wrapped their arms around them and kept them safe. But for them today to be in that court, to have a sentencing, to have the man that killed their little girl sent to prison for a long time, that's very important in taking that next step.
Absolutely. I mean, and they are the voices that deserve to be heard. They are the people whose opinion matters.
Yeah.
They have gone through something that, you know, to describe it as your worst nightmare doesn't even come close to it. You know, they are the people who deserve to have the attention. You know, they've kept a very dignified silence for these past 6 months, and it is important now that they get that chance, and they get a chance to say it on a public record, and that, you know, the person responsible is forced to hear it and forced to understand. Whether he's capable of that is a different question, but this is their chance, and, you know, they are the ones who deserve to have the focus and the attention and the support.
And I was talking about it in my conversation with Mark Foreman about what the community have been doing to support not just the families directly affected, but people who lived on Hart Street, people who saw the aftermath of that, who ran towards danger to help those girls and the teachers caught up in this. The wider community, you know, everybody knows everyone. So young girls and boys who could have been in that dance class, but it was really popular, it was full, they couldn't get in. The ripple effect of what happened is so powerful. How have you been supporting the community as a whole?
Yeah, because I think back to that, you know, to July 29th, and you start with the sounds, and the rumours kind of start to unfold, and then it turns to, oh my God, you know, we all children there. Do you know somebody who was there? And once the kind of the horrific details came out, I think the response was extraordinary. You look, the vigil that took place the day after, there was more than 1,000 people there for something that started with a Facebook post. Yeah. And, you know, it wasn't in any way officially organised at first. It was just people wanted to find a way to again, efforts to help their families, but also to come together and support each other, because no one could really get their head around something so horrific happening on their doorsteps. And then a day later, you get those awful riots. And the following morning, people immediately, their first response is to get out and clean up, help repair the mosque, help fix walls.
Yeah, can we talk about that? Because, the shining light in Southport during that really dark time, I noticed it. It was palpable. It was a community coming together. But because of what happened, there was so much division as well. Those riots sparked by what happened because of misinformation, totally unrelated to the tragedy, the personal tragedy that Southport was feeling. What's the lasting effect of that? Because I spoke to so many angry residents. There was one woman I spoke to who said, I'm so angry, I can't talk to you on camera, but this isn't in our name. This is not what it was about. Do not associate whatever you want to get angry about with what's happened to those 3 little girls and us, this community.
Yeah, I think there's a great desire for Southport not to be defined by the attack. The residents here, we want to honour the girls, honour the victims, but not to be defined by the actions of one evil man. It's that that response that happened in the days afterwards, that's continued for months on. There's still fundraising events going on. There's still memorial events. You can, if you drive around Southport now, you'll still see the pink bows which are up there to remember the 3 girls.
The community, because it doesn't end with the sentencing today. There is a long-lasting impact that there's no time frame on that.
No, absolutely. I mean, as I say, the kind of the wounds are still very raw. We're 6 months on, which is nothing really. There's going to be times when when the anniversary comes around and it's all going to be relived again. But all of those efforts, all those the fundraising efforts, the charity events, the community events of bringing people together, they will continue. And I think Southport has been determined to show its best colours in the light of just something that was unimaginable.
Coming up, much more from outside and inside Liverpool Crown Court as the Southport killer is due to be sentenced in the coming hours. After the break, I'm going to be joined by a former Merseyside police inspector.
Okay, so let's just go back to, so as I was saying earlier, when teenagers start going through these weird phases that they do, which, probably most of us did, but you don't register that you're even, going through those changes. I don't know. It's all about you when you're a teenager, isn't it? That's all that matters. It's all about you and your friends, your parents. You don't listen to you. You rebel against your parents, and I expect that's what Axel has gone through with his family. I think his family have probably gone through absolute hell. Now, Axel is a little bit more than your normal teenage angst, of course, that he's gone through. He's definitely got issues. He looked like resentful, didn't he? Like he had a chip on his shoulder. In the pictures of him when he was about 13, I mean, he appeared in that Doctor Who commercial. Let's have a look at that while we've got a, when did he change? When did he become obsessed? Like they mentioned COVID then, didn't they? That he had been flagged up as having problems. Most teenagers have got anxiety. Most children these days have got anxiety issues, or they've got ADHD, or they're saying he was autistic as well. All these are common issues, I think, with children. But when does it go sort of past that? Past those kind of things to this serious sort of like real aggression, breaking another child's wrist. That's not anxiety. That's not ADHD. That's not autism. That's more than that. Now, they were blaming it on COVID because apparently before, up to COVID, he was cooperating with the different authorities that he'd been referred to. And then at some point in time, he stopped cooperating. And because these things are voluntary, and also, going back to what I was saying earlier, if you've got a child or a grandchild or anyone who's got issues like this, get them sorted before they're 18, because after they're 18, you cannot even go to the psychologist will not even discuss it with you. You know, you may be the mother, you may be the father, you may be the guardian or whoever, but once that person is 18, these professionals can't even discuss it with you because of, you know, privacy, etc. So it's a very, you just have to hope, you know, that your child doesn't go through that. But you know what? You can't guarantee it, and it can happen to anyone. You might think it can never happen to your child, but it can. Let's see the Doctor Who thing.
10 counts of attempted murder, 2 terrorism charges, and possession of a knife. 7-year-old Elsie, 9-year-old Alice, and 6-year-old...
Oh, hang on, it's back, sorry.
Taylor Swift-themed dance class in Southport last July. Floral tributes were left on the road near where that attack happened in the following days. Community members tended to those flowers over the coming weeks. Today, the families, friends, and the community, whose lives were changed forever that day, wait to hear the fate of the man responsible. Well, I'm joined now by Peter Williams, former Merseyside Police Inspector, now a lecturer at the Liverpool Centre for Advanced Policing Studies at John Moores University. Peter, good to see you. Thank you for coming to see us. Big day today for Southport.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the amount of press interest alone, this will have global coverage, and rightly so, because I think everybody's waiting to hear what the defence are going to say, if they're going to offer any mitigation at all, some sort of explanation as to what has happened. But I think for us all, it's going forward from here. How do we deal with these type of issues, which is what I think the Prime Minister was referring to in his statements on Tuesday. So today's going to be, I think, a watershed event. And from here, I think we're going to see a review of contest, which is the UK's counter-terrorism strategy, and particularly that of prevent.
He talked about a new kind of terrorism, didn't he? And I was talking to our crime correspondent, Martin Brunt, before, and he made the important point that Rudakubana did not slip through the net. He was caught in the net several times, but it didn't actually fit the criteria for prevent, say, for them to take him to the next stage. But it was clear that this was a troubled young man for various reasons, but the most alarming point was his addiction and obsession to violence. But there didn't seem to be an organisation that could deal with that. Is that something that will be worked out in the future? Because we know plans are afoot for prevent to maybe take in that.
Well, obviously, prevent has got its specific role and the reason why it's there. And out of the 4 pillars, if you like, of the counter-terrorism strategy, prevent has been the one which has seen the most changes and amendments. In 2015, for example, under Theresa May, it was placed on a statutory footing, and that was the first Western country to do that. In the aftermath of the attacks 2017, and particularly those where there was a lone offender, such as the Conservative MP David Amos, the then government ordered a review under William Shawcross into prevent, which reported 2 years ago, with 34 recommendations, which the previous government were in the process of implementing. Now, they clearly weren't happy with how prevent was operating, hence the Shawcross report. This government, because of the timing of this event, have been able to say anything about it until now, but it's clear there's going to be a major review of it. There's been an excellent appointment by Keir Starmer so far under a prevent commissioner, which is Sir David Anderson, KC. Now, David Anderson, your viewers may recognise the name. He was previously the author of the Anderson Report, 2017, into the attacks in London and Manchester. He's also been previously the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, and he's published articles and radio programmes, actually, on counter-terrorism policy and particularly prevent. So I think under his guardianship, we're likely to see some major changes. But Keir Starmer's already said in the statement, there's been mistakes on prevent. In the wider context, I think there's been a failure of safeguarding here, what we used to call the child protection system, because the reviews this defendant has had it's clearly he would have come into the category of a child at risk. And it seems to me no agency picked that up. So I think the public inquiry will be looking very closely at the safeguarding system.
We will learn more about Rudakubana with the details that will come out once the hearing gets underway. But what we know so far is the big question about, why wasn't he charged with an act of terrorism? And it's because he didn't fit the framework of terrorism. He didn't subscribe to a particular ideology. What we know so far is that he was reading a wide range of materials. So you couldn't say that it was motivated by an ideology. But you talk about the thousands that are referred to prevent. How many of them have the same background as Rudakubana? Young men, isolated, obsessed with violence. We know we have a problem with knife crime in this country. This is a whole area that, is this not being tackled by a particular organisation? Is it not being seen as its own problem that needs to be addressed? The focus has been so much on terrorism that this is being overlooked.
Well, I think there's a few things there. Firstly is when you talk about the terrorism, one of the issues there is the definition of terrorism, which Keir Starmer made some references to in that particular statement. Now, the definition, there are 700 definitions across the world of what actually terrorism is. And just after 9/11, the British ambassador to the UN, Anthony Greenstock, said, what looks and smells like terrorism is probably terrorism. Now, the viewers would probably relate to that.
But if it's
But
not
unfortunately,
written down as law, the
it
parameters are there.
doesn't fit the definition under the Terrorism Act of 2000, which Keir Starmer was hinting at. So people slip through the net when an incident isn't necessarily classed as being a terrorist incident. And I think in this case, that has happened. But I think once again, going forward, I'm not so sure that the safeguarding system is equipped to deal with the likes of this particular defendant, where he was placed under certainly some form of supervision, which of course would be aimed directly at his behaviour. Had he been put in the criminal justice system per se, I think that might have been a different story. But without that, I think the public inquiry's got to come up with some key recommendations going forward.
Recommendations that are implemented, because
Absolutely.
of course that's always where this falls down, doesn't it? I lose count of the amount of times I've sat here on Sky News and talked about really important reports, groundbreaking, these recommendations are going to make the difference, and then a month, a year later, you're talking about the fact that they haven't been implemented and another incident has happened again.
Well, sadly, what we're talking about is I use the child protection system, which we now call safeguarding, and we know, sadly, we're hearing consistent stories where the child protection system or the safeguarding system has failed young people, and in some respect, it has failed this young man in that regard.
Well, the hearing hasn't got underway yet. As you would expect, it's a full courtroom, it's a small courtroom, so much interest in this. We did expect some kind of delay. We'll let people know when it does get underway. We've got a live blog up on our website, and I'm just checking in with our colleagues in court, but it hasn't got underway yet. What will happen to this young man? He cannot get a whole life order because he was 17 when he carried out the crime. He's under 21. There is a framework within which the judge has to
Okay, now it seems like there's been a delay. I'm probably going to come off stream in a moment and then come back in an hour or so and see what's occurring. What I want to just show you before I do finish is, remember the Doctor Who video that so once upon a time, this lad was a young lad who what happened to him? What happened to this boy? Anyway, let's have a look. So this was the Doctor Who video that he took part in. Now, he looks a little bit of a misfit. I expect he did get bullied at school, and not only because of his colour, maybe, but also he's quite tall, isn't he? And a bit gangly, and children are cruel. And I expect he did, as I say, I expect this young lad, he probably did get bullied. Maybe that's what made him go into isolation, or maybe he was smoking skunk marijuana and that's what sent him a bit haywire, or maybe he was born bad. You know, will we ever find out? I don't know. But if you look at this advert, you can see he's a little bit gangly. And you know what kids are like.
It's that time of year again. You can even dress up as every Doctor Who ever. Time of year again. Year again. It's that time of year again. You can even dress up as every Doctor Who ever. That time of year again. You can even dress up as every Doctor Who ever.
So, yeah, you know, what happened to that boy? What happened to him? You know, and why were the signs not picked up on? So many signs. You could not have had any more red flags than they had, could you? You know, it's ridiculous. So, right, where am I going? Where am I going? Because I'm going to go literally only for half an hour. I'm going to go. I don't know what time this, the actual sort of hearing will go. You can bet as soon as I go, because the hearing has been delayed. At the moment, it's saying on Sky News, the hearing is delayed as court fills up. But that was 31 minutes ago, so I don't know if that. Anyway, I'm going to go for 30 minutes to an hour. I hope you'll come and join me later for part 2, where hopefully we'll get to hear what's going on and then go into the judge's sentencing. Thanks for watching so far. Oh, I'm going to I haven't lit my candle yet. I'm going to light my candle. I'm going to leave it burning for these girls, their families, and also, you know, for Axel's family. And why was this boy allowed to slip through the net so many times? Even though, to be honest, earlier on, he was forthcoming about his obsessions and his things. Then after COVID and during COVID, he stopped cooperating. He should have been made to cooperate. You know, he should have been investigated better. You know, when they went into his home and they found all that bomb making equipment, you know, this guy was, you couldn't get more red flags. It's impossible. Anyway, I'll see you very shortly. Half an hour, I'll be back. See you later. And until I see you again, may your God go with you. Bye.